when I first came to my town and I first went to my colegio, my counterpart brought me to the auditorium where they were doing a presentation about kind of like the trajectories of recent graduates. How many go to university, join the army, join a Senate course, whatever. At a certain point, a parent kind of stands up and he's like, well, what about the ones who are stuck here, who stay in Coocaita? And they didn't really have a great response, and this ignited an increasingly heated back and forth that ultimately didn't really go anywhere, didn't satisfy anybody. But it did highlight that you have this kind of seething undercurrent of concern about youth opportunity in a lot of these rural communities. Obviously, in the United States, we have a lot of challenges with respect to youth opportunity, particularly when it comes to things like housing costs, which put a big damper on mobility, especially moving to places that have the largest concentration of opportunity, that is sort of the big coastal cities. But here in Colombia, it's a lot more intense and kind of a different character. There's two factors that I'm going to highlight here. The first is that a lot of students, recent graduates, feel a kind of economic familial obligation to farm work, in the sense that their families own farms and they need this constant generational input replenishment of labor in order to keep that farm going. And that farm provides like sort of the material base for the survival of that family, and often, forms a unit within an extended family. So, if a student just goes somewhere else or does something else or fails to sort of provide the labor that farm needs in order to survive, it potentially has some pretty significant repercussions for not just the direct family, but also maybe relations, especially older ones who might rely on the working age population. So you do have a significantly more intense obligation of this sort, which kind of shuts off a lot of potential avenues in terms of higher education, jobs that require more specialized skills that you might cultivate in whether it's vocational schools, anything that SENA offers, universities, whatever. So there are a lot of challenges with respect to that. There are a lot of things that make youth sort of sticky, in the sense of like they're kind of stuck where they are, where they were born. It's a lot more difficult for them to leave because of those kinds of obligations, which don't exist with as much intensity in the United States, though of course you can find them depending on where you are. And the second thing that I want to bring up, which I think Ezra is going to talk about more specifically, if he hasn't already, is the level of teenage pregnancy. You will probably very likely see, several students, at least, one student in your colegio who either has a child or is currently pregnant. The levels of teenage pregnancy in Colombia are unfortunately sky high. And of course, that's going to shut off a lot of ambitions that young people might have. I don't mean to say that you have a child, like your life's over. That's not what I'm talking about. It's more so just that in Colombia, the resources and opportunities to manage child rearing are significantly smaller and less accessible than they are in the United States. So it's going to take up much more of your time. It's a much greater challenge. It's significantly harder to sort of leap over that hurdle. And that's, one of the principal problems with it. It's not just the level, it's also the intensity. It's much deeper and it's much wider as an issue. And so those are like sort of the two issues that I would highlight when it comes to sort of blockading the opportunities for youth. These things are issues that significantly impact the mobility to places that have, formal employment, high wage employment, things like that. And depending on where you are, this can be slightly different. For example, in Coocaita, which is located sort of right on the tourist corridor in Boyacá, from Tunja to Villa de Leyva, you do have like significantly more bleed off than in some more rural towns. I'm only maybe 30 minutes away from Tunja. Somewhere like Umbita is like 3 hours away. So, those people are going to have a lot more of a challenge leaving their home municipality and finding some kind of other opportunity elsewhere. Here in Coocaita, at least people have the opportunity to leave because things are much closer, much more tightly integrated. But the flip side of that is the community will enter a slow period of decline because there isn't really a constant, crop of young labor to replenish an aging population, which is kind of similar to what you might see in some rural communities in the United States, whose decline is probably more driven by lack of manufacturing employment than decline in agricultural employment, which occurred more so in first half of the 20th century. But yeah, so those are some of the main dynamics that I think are really important to focus on. As a volunteer, you absolutely can help students navigate the, for example, university application process, help recent graduates figure out what they can do in terms of maybe entering a Senate course, stuff like that. There are a lot of opportunities for you to help people make the best of their situation, including, adult financial education, for example. So we do have a lot of capacity to address this issue, but it is a common one. You're going to see a lot of youth who don't really know exactly what to do with their lives, where they want to go, if they can't even go anywhere. They might have these really intense obligations, whether it's in the form of, a child or, some kind of familial obligation. And that stuff is always important to be cognizant of. But yeah, social context. Yes.